Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's presentation. I'm excited to have you here as we explore the fascinating world of psychology. Today, we'll start with an introduction to psychology itself. The course is titled BPCC-101, Introduction to Psychology, and we are beginning with Unit 1, which covers the origin of psychology. This is part of our Bachelor of Arts, HUNS, in Psychology program, offered by Sapphire. Throughout this session, we'll look at how psychology originated, its evolution, and key concepts that have shaped the field. So, let's dive in and get started. Let's begin by exploring the origin of psychology. Psychology, as you may already know, is the science that studies behavior and the mind. It concerns itself with almost every aspect of human life. When we talk about behavior, we're referring to everything a person or animal does that can be observed or measured. But psychology also goes deeper, exploring internal processes like thoughts, emotions, and motives. It's important to understand that psychology is a scientific discipline. Its goal is to describe, explain, predict, and sometimes even control behavior through systematic observation and experimentation. So it's not just about guessing or opinions, it's based on evidence and rigorous research. At the same time, psychology is both a science and an art. As a science, it relies on data and scientific methods. But as an art, it applies this knowledge practically to solve real-life human problems. There are some common misconceptions about psychology that we should clear up. Many people think psychologists can read minds or only deal with abnormal behavior. But in reality, psychology studies both normal and abnormal aspects of human functioning. Understanding where psychology came from helps us see how it has evolved. It started from philosophical ideas about the soul and the mind, but today, it's a modern scientific discipline focused on understanding behavior and cognition. This evolution reflects how the field has become more empirical and evidence-based over time. Let's take a closer look at the objectives of this unit. First, we want to define psychology. It's important to understand what psychology really means and how it has evolved over time as a scientific discipline. Next, we'll explore the historical background of psychology. This means looking at its journey from ancient philosophical ideas to the modern scientific methods we use today. Understanding this development helps us appreciate how psychology has grown into the field it is now. We will also focus on the different perspectives and methods used in psychology. There are several major approaches, each offering unique ways to study behavior and mental processes, and we'll discuss how researchers gather and analyze data in this field. Additionally, it's essential to recognize the various subfields of psychology. These branches cover different areas of human behavior and mental health, and knowing about them broadens our understanding of the discipline as a whole. Finally, we'll discuss the research landscape in India. This includes looking at how psychology has grown here, the contributions made by Indian psychologists, and some of the recent developments and contemporary research happening in the country. All these points are interconnected, helping us build a comprehensive understanding of psychology's origin, development, and current state, especially within the Indian context. Welcome to our discussion on Introduction to Psychology. Today, we'll focus on the origin of psychology, which is the foundation of understanding human behavior and mental processes. Psychology is concerned with almost every aspect of human life, how we think, feel, and act in various situations. It helps us make sense of why people behave the way they do, which is essential for many fields like education, health, and even everyday interactions. Now, let's address some common misconceptions. Many people think psychology only deals with abnormal behavior or that psychologists can read minds. But that's not accurate. Psychology scientifically studies both normal and abnormal behaviors, giving us a broader understanding of human experience. It's about understanding the full spectrum of human actions. Speaking of science, psychology uses systematic methods, observation, experiments, and analysis to study behavior and mental processes objectively. This scientific approach ensures that our conclusions are based on evidence, not just opinions or assumptions. The main purpose of studying psychology is to distinguish scientific knowledge from myths and misconceptions. It helps us understand human behavior based on facts, which is crucial for applying that knowledge effectively. In this unit, we'll explore the meaning and definitions of psychology, its historical development, and its scientific nature as a discipline. This foundation will help us appreciate how psychology has evolved and why it's a vital scientific field today. Let's explore the early definitions of psychology and see how the understanding of the field has evolved over time. Initially, psychology developed from philosophy, where early thinkers were mainly interested in understanding the soul, or psyche, and its connection to human life and morality. They believed that the soul was the essence of what made us human. Back then, psychology was often called the science of the soul. Philosophers thought that by studying the soul, they could uncover the true nature of morality and human existence. However, this approach faced some challenges. Since the soul couldn't be observed, measured, or defined with scientific precision, it was criticized for being too metaphysical and lacking empirical evidence. As time went on, psychology was then described as the science of the mind. This shift focused more on mental processes like thinking, perception, and reasoning. While this seemed progress, it still had limitations. The mind itself cannot be directly observed or measured, which made studying it scientifically difficult. Plus, this definition ignored observable behavior, which we can study more objectively. In the 19th century, psychologists started to define psychology as the science of consciousness. This meant they were interested in conscious experiences, things like awareness, sensations, thoughts, and feelings. But this approach also had problems. Consciousness is highly subjective, meaning it varies from person to person, making it hard to study scientifically. It also excluded unconscious processes and animal behavior, which we now know influence human actions. Because these earlier definitions relied on concepts like the soul and consciousness, which are unobservable, psychologists began shifting toward more objective, scientific approaches. This led to the development of behaviorism, focusing on observable and measurable behavior, something that can be studied scientifically and reliably. This shift marked a major turning point in the field, moving us toward a more scientific understanding of human behavior. In the early 20th century, a psychologist named John B. Watson, often called the father of behaviorism, had a significant impact on how we understand psychology. He redefined the field as the study of behavior, shifting the focus away from the mind and consciousness because he believed these aspects were not directly observable. Instead, Watson argued that psychology should concentrate only on behaviors that we can see and measure, both in humans and animals. He emphasized that there are no fundamental differences between human and animal behavior, which means they can both be studied using the same scientific principles. This was a groundbreaking idea at the time because it brought a more objective, scientific approach to studying behavior. Now, let's look at the key principles of behaviorism. First, it suggests that behavior is shaped by learning and the environment, not by innate or inherited factors. This means that our surroundings and experiences influence how we act. Second, it stresses the importance of controlled observation and experimentation in psychological research, relying on evidence rather than speculation. A central concept in behaviorism is the stimulus-response relationship, or SR for short. Essentially, every behavior is seen as a response to an external stimulus, something in the environment that triggers a specific action. Behaviorism played a crucial role in establishing psychology as an objective and experimental science, similar to the natural sciences like physics or biology. It promoted the use of empirical methods to systematically study behavior. Over time, later psychologists built on this foundation to explore internal processes like perception, memory, and cognition, broadening the scope of psychology beyond just observable actions. Let's look at how the definition of psychology has evolved over time. Initially, psychologists focused mainly on studying behavior, the things we do. But as our understanding grew, it became clear that to truly understand behavior, we also need to study mental processes, what we think, feel, and experience internally. This shift led to a modern definition of psychology that combines both aspects. Today, psychology is often described as the scientific study of behavior and mental processes. You might see references to this in works like Sickerli and Mayer or Kuhn and Mitterer, who emphasize this integrated approach. Now, if we look at the overall evolution, psychology has gradually moved from a focus on the soul, then the mind, then consciousness, and finally to behavior and mental processes. This progression marks a significant transformation from philosophical speculation to a rigorous scientific discipline. This scientific approach relies on observation, measurement, and experimentation, which helps us understand human behavior more objectively and systematically. So, in essence, modern psychology is a blend of studying what we do and what we think and feel, grounded firmly in scientific methods. Now, let's take a closer look at the current definitions of psychology. As we see here, in BPCC 101, our focus is on understanding how psychology has evolved over time. Initially, the early focus was on concepts like the soul, the mind, and consciousness. These ideas were more philosophical in nature, and they aimed to understand what makes us human at a very fundamental level. However, as psychology matured, it began to shift toward a more scientific approach. It started to be recognized as a discipline that studies both behavior and mental processes in a systematic way. This means that instead of just speculating about the mind, psychologists now rely on observable, measurable evidence. You'll notice that the early definitions were quite broad and abstract, but over time, they became more precise. Modern psychologists emphasize that to truly understand behavior, we need to consider what's happening internally, our thoughts, feelings, and motivations, as well as external factors like our environment. So, in essence, psychology today is about understanding the complex interplay between internal mental states and the external world, using scientific methods to explore these relationships. This evolution highlights how our understanding of human behavior has become more rigorous and evidence-based, which is fundamental to the overall theme of this course. Let's take a look at some prominent modern definitions of psychology. Morgan and colleagues in 1986 describe psychology as the science of both human and animal behavior. They emphasize that it also involves applying this scientific understanding to solve human problems. Feldman in 1996 simplifies it further by calling it the scientific study of behavior and mental processes. Then, Tavris and Wade in 1997 add an important layer by highlighting how behavior and mental processes are influenced by an organism's physical state, mental state, and external environment. This points to the complex interaction between internal and external factors. Does in 1998 focuses on human behavior specifically, along with mental processes and the context in which these occur. It reminds us that understanding behavior isn't just about the actions themselves, but also about the environment and circumstances surrounding them. Eysenck in 2004 describes psychology as a science that uses behavioral and other types of evidence to understand internal processes, those unseen mechanisms that influence why people behave the way they do. Finally, Sickerli and Mayer, along with Kuhn and Mitterer, in 2006 and 2007-2008, summarize it succinctly as the scientific study of behavior and mental processes, reinforcing the idea that psychology is rooted in scientific inquiry. Overall, these definitions highlight that psychology is a broad, scientific field that explores behavior and mental processes, considering internal mechanisms, external influences, and practical applications. Let's take a closer look at the current definitions of psychology. First, one of the key themes is the scientific and empirical approach. This means that psychology is based on systematic observation and experimentation rather than mere speculation or guesswork. We rely on evidence to understand human and animal behavior. Next, there's a focus on behavior itself. This includes all actions and responses that we can observe directly or indirectly, whether in humans or animals. Behavior is something we can see and measure, which makes it a fundamental aspect of psychology. But psychology isn't just about external actions. It also includes mental processes, those internal activities like thinking, memory, emotions, motivation, and problem-solving. These internal experiences are just as important as observable actions and are essential to understanding the full picture of human and animal functioning. Finally, an important point is that behavior and mental processes are influenced by a combination of factors: biological, mental, and environmental. This interaction highlights how complex and interconnected these influences are in shaping how we act and think. To conclude, modern psychology integrates both observable behavior and internal mental processes. This comprehensive approach helps us understand not just what organisms do, but also how they think and adapt within their environments. It's this blend that makes psychology a truly holistic science. Let's explore the nature and characteristics of behavior. Behavior, as we understand it in psychology, includes everything an organism does. This means all actions, responses, and reactions that we can observe, whether directly or indirectly. It covers both external movements like walking or speaking, and internal processes such as thinking, feeling, and remembering. One key point to remember is that behavior is influenced by multiple factors. These include biological, psychological, social, cultural, and environmental influences. For example, heredity, motivation, emotions, learning experiences, and social context all play crucial roles in shaping how we behave. It's important to see that both individual traits and our surroundings interact constantly to produce our behavior. Now, when we talk about behavior, we also see that it varies in complexity. Some behaviors are quite simple, like sneezing or blinking, automatic reflexes. Others are much more complex, like flying a plane or performing surgery, which require conscious effort, learning, and skill. Some behaviors become automatic over time, through habit formation, while others demand our deliberate attention and practice. Finally, every individual is unique in their behavior. Even in the same situation, different people may respond differently. This variation is because of unique biological traits, personal experiences, and personality differences. So, even when two people face the same circumstances, their responses can be quite distinct, influenced by their background, abilities, and emotional state. Understanding these characteristics helps us appreciate the complexity and diversity of human behavior, which is fundamental to the study of psychology. Let's explore the nature and characteristics of behavior. Despite individual differences, there are some universal patterns we all share. For example, actions like removing dust from the eye or responding to pain are common across humans. These similarities reflect basic human and biological instincts that connect us all. Moving on, behavior is purposeful and goal-directed. Every action we take is driven by a goal, either to achieve something or to avoid discomfort. Think about drinking water when you're thirsty, that's approaching a goal. Or switching off a fan to avoid cold, that's avoiding an unpleasant sensation. Our behaviors are motivated by these underlying goals. Next, behavior is both changeable and stable. It can change over time through learning, experience, or environmental influences. But at the same time, we tend to develop consistent habits or patterns that remain stable. So, behavior is dynamic, yet it also has a degree of stability that helps shape our personality. Finally, behavior is integrated. It reflects a combination of physiological, psychological, and social factors working together. Each person behaves as a unified whole, with organized goals, motives, and emotions. This level of integration plays a key role in our personality and how well we adapt to different situations. In summary, behavior is a complex, purposeful, and adaptable process. It's influenced by many internal and external factors. Understanding these characteristics allows psychologists to study, predict, and even modify behavior in meaningful ways. Let's talk about some additional features and how behavior is integrated in our lives. First, behavior shows both change and stability. Human behavior is quite dynamic. It's something we can modify through learning, experience, and the environment around us. For example, You might develop new habits or change your attitudes over time. But at the same time, behavior also displays stability. Many of us tend to maintain consistent personality traits and patterns across different situations. Take a calm person, for instance. Usually, they remain calm even when faced with new challenges. Next, behavior is purposeful and goal-oriented. Every action we take usually has a specific purpose or a goal behind it. Some behaviors are approach behaviors, meaning we act to achieve something positive, like studying hard to succeed. Others are avoidance behaviors, where we act to prevent or escape discomfort or harm, like avoiding arguments to keep peace. Recognizing this helps us understand that our actions are often driven by underlying intentions. Finally, behavior is highly integrated. All human actions stem from a combination of physical, emotional, social, and cognitive factors. Rather than being random reactions, our behavior follows an organized pattern. This integration allows us to act as whole, unified beings, rather than disconnected parts. Psychologists often refer to this organization as personality, the consistent ways in which we think, feel, and act. Understanding this helps us see how all these elements come together to shape who we are and how we behave. Let's explore some additional features of behavior and how it integrates into our understanding of psychology. First, behavior reflects adaptation. This means that our actions allow us to adjust and respond effectively to changes in our environment. For example, when faced with new situations, we learn and develop patterns that help us survive and function well. These adaptive behaviors are crucial for our everyday success. Moving on, behavior is a complex phenomenon. It's influenced by so many variables, biological factors, emotional states, and environmental influences, that predicting behavior isn't always straightforward. That's why psychologists rely on systematic methods like observation, experimentation, and measurement to study behavior scientifically. These tools help us make sense of the complexity. To sum up, human behavior is purposeful, adaptable, and integrated, yet it's also influenced by multiple factors. Despite all this complexity, behavior tends to have a certain stability and individuality. This mix of predictability and variability makes psychology both a challenging and a fascinating science. It highlights how rich and intricate human nature truly is. Let's explore the historical development of psychology, starting with its origins. The word psychology comes from two Greek words: psyche, meaning soul or breath, and logos, meaning study or knowledge. So originally, psychology meant the study of the soul. Interestingly, before the 19th century, psychology wasn't a separate field. Instead, it was considered a part of philosophy, which looked at questions about the mind and existence. As time went on, scholars started applying scientific methods to understand questions about the mind and behavior. Think of philosophers like Aristotle, Descartes, and Locke. They explored how knowledge and perception develop, laying important groundwork for what would become scientific psychology. The key here is how philosophy, which deals with ideas about the mind, began to merge with physiology, the study of the nervous system. This combination set the stage for psychology to evolve into a scientific discipline. The turning point came in 1879, when Wilhelm Wundt, a German physiologist, established the very first psychology laboratory at the University of Leipzig. This was a major milestone because it marked the official birth of psychology as an independent science. Wundt focused on studying the structure of the mind by examining conscious experiences through controlled experiments, a method called structuralism. This was the beginning of modern psychology, moving away from purely philosophical questions toward empirical, scientific investigation. Let's take a closer look at Wilhelm Wundt, often called the father of modern psychology. Wundt was a pioneering figure because he was the first to apply experimental methods specifically to studying mental processes. His main goal was to break down consciousness into its basic elements, things like sensations, thoughts, and emotions, and analyze them systematically. What's really important here is that his work showed us that psychological phenomena could be measured scientifically, just like physical events. This was a significant shift from philosophical speculation to empirical investigation. Now, moving on to the year 1879, which is considered a landmark in the history of psychology. That year is seen as the birth of psychology as an independent scientific field. Before this, psychology wasn't a formal discipline. There were no dedicated departments or courses. But once laboratory changed that, it became a training ground for the first generation of psychologists around the world. His influence spread across Europe and America, inspiring countless researchers. To summarize, psychology evolved from philosophical inquiries into a systematic science, and the establishment of Wundt's lab in 1879 was a pivotal moment. It transformed the study of the mind from speculative thinking into a scientific investigation of behavior and consciousness, setting the foundation for the entire field we study today. Let's explore why psychology is considered a science. Psychology is defined as the science of behavior, which means it aims to understand how and why people act, think, and feel in particular ways. Just like other sciences, psychology relies on systematic observation, experimentation, and verification to gather knowledge. Its main goal is to describe, classify, explain, and predict behavioral phenomena using objective methods. Now, when we talk about science in general, we're referring to a body of knowledge that is carefully obtained through observation and measurement. Science develops theories and laws that explain how different facts are related. Importantly, scientific knowledge is objective, testable, and verifiable, meaning it's not based on personal opinions or beliefs, but on evidence. Connecting this to psychology, psychologists use the scientific method to study behavior, much like natural scientists study physical phenomena. They employ controlled observations, experiments, and statistical analysis to ensure their conclusions are valid. The key here is that their findings should be replicable and free from bias, which strengthens the reliability of scientific psychology. This systematic approach helps us better understand human behavior in a rigorous and credible way. Now, let's explore the scope of psychological science. Psychology studies both human and animal behavior across a variety of conditions. It's a field that draws on insights from biology, sociology, and philosophy to help us understand how internal factors like thoughts and emotions, and external factors like environment and social influences, shape behavior. The knowledge we gain isn't just theoretical, it's applied to real-world problems. For example, in education, health, industry, and even in our personal lives, psychology helps us find practical solutions. Next, it's important to understand that psychology is both a science and an art. On one hand, it relies on scientific methods, systematic observation, experimentation, and data collection to study behavior and mental processes. But on the other hand, when it comes to applying these principles, like in therapy, teaching, or counseling, it becomes an art. It requires skill, experience, and importantly, empathy to effectively address human problems. So, in summary, psychology qualifies as a science because it uses empirical, systematic, and objective methods to understand behavior. Yet, it remains deeply practical and human-centered, which is why it's also considered an art. This unique blend allows psychology to be both rigorous and compassionate, bridging scientific precision with human understanding. Now, let's look at some key characteristics of science as they apply to psychology. First, empirical observation is fundamental. Psychology, like all sciences, relies on careful observation and experimentation rather than simply opinions or beliefs. This means gathering behavioral data through precise measurement and objective recording of what both people and animals do. The important thing here is that our findings are based on solid evidence, not assumptions or intuition. Next, we have the systematic approach and theory building. Psychologists collect and organize data to develop theories that help explain behavior. The scientific process involves steps like observation, data collection, analysis, and finally interpretation and generalization. These theories serve as tools to summarize what we've learned and to predict future behaviors. Finally, measurement is a core aspect of science. In psychology, measurement involves assigning numerical values to observations, following specific rules. This is especially important because it allows us to quantify abstract concepts like intelligence, personality, or motivation. Through standardized tests and experiments, psychologists can make reliable measurements, which are essential for scientific study. Together, these characteristics, empirical observation, systematic approach, and measurement, help us understand human behavior in a rigorous, evidence-based way. Let's talk about some key characteristics of science as they apply to psychology. First, we have the importance of operational definitions. Scientific progress really depends on having clear and precise definitions of concepts. Psychologists define ideas like learning, memory, or motivation in terms of observable behaviors or operations. For example, intelligence might be defined as the score someone gets on a standardized intelligence test. This approach helps ensure that our terms are measurable, comparable, and testable, which is fundamental in scientific research. Next, let's consider psychology as a behavioral science. Unlike physics or chemistry, which deal with inanimate matter, psychology focuses on living, thinking organisms. That makes its subject matter inherently more complex. Human behavior is influenced by a multitude of internal and external factors, which makes it less predictable and harder to control. Despite these complexities, psychology shares common goals with other sciences, such as observation, explanation, prediction, and control of phenomena. These shared goals help us understand human behavior scientifically. Now, how does psychology relate to other sciences? It is classified as part of the social or behavioral sciences, along with sociology, anthropology, and education. While it is distinct from physical and biological sciences, psychology still applies similar research principles to study human experience. This connection highlights that, although human behavior is complex, psychology employs the scientific method to study and understand it objectively. To sum up, psychology meets all the key characteristics of science: empirical observation, systematic analysis, measurement, and operational precision. Even though human behavior is complex, psychology uses scientific methods to explore and understand it in an objective way. Now, let's summarize the key points we've covered about the origin of psychology. First, psychology as a discipline is the scientific study of behavior and mental processes, not just in humans, but also in animals. Its main goal is to describe, explain, predict, and even modify behavior, and it does so through objective and systematic methods. This field really bridges biological, psychological, and social perspectives to help us better understand how humans function. Moving on to the evolution of psychology, it all started in philosophy, where it was initially seen as the study of the soul, or psyche. Over time, the focus shifted, from the soul to the mind, then to consciousness, and finally to observable behavior. A pivotal moment was in 1879, when Wilhelm Wundt established his laboratory, marking psychology's emergence as a formal science. Finally, let's talk about behavior itself. Behavior includes everything we can observe and measure: actions, reactions, and even internal processes like thoughts and emotions. It's influenced by many factors: biological, environmental, emotional, and cultural. Despite this complexity, behavior tends to be purposeful and adaptable. It can change based on circumstances, but it also shows a degree of stability across different situations and over time. All these aspects help us understand the complexity and richness of human and animal actions. Let's wrap up with some key takeaways. Psychology, as we've discussed, is fundamentally a science. It meets all the essential features of science, such as empirical observation and data collection. It follows a systematic approach and involves theory building. Measurement and operational definitions are central to ensuring clarity and precision. Because of this, psychology is part of the social and behavioral sciences, applying the scientific method to study living beings. But psychology isn't just a science, it's also an art. When we apply psychological principles practically, whether it's to improve learning, health, relationships, or personal growth, it becomes an art. It's about using evidence-based methods creatively to make a real difference. The overall essence of psychology is that it helps us understand what behavior is, why it happens, and how it can be changed or improved. This foundational unit sets the stage for exploring more advanced topics, including research methods, schools of thought, and practical applications. And the most important point to remember is that psychology has evolved into a discipline that's both scientific and applied. It's dedicated to understanding human and animal behavior through systematic, empirical investigation, making it a meaningful and impactful field. Thank you so much for watching. I truly appreciate your time and attention throughout this presentation. If you found the content helpful or inspiring, please remember to give it a thumbs up, like, and bell subscribe so you won't miss out on more amazing videos from us. Your support means a lot and helps us continue creating valuable content. Once again, thank you from the Skills Sapphire team. We look forward to sharing more with you soon.